Josh.
I'm Julia.
I'm Sammy.
And today, we're going to tell you about Japanese imperialism.
In the late 19th century, many countries were focused on expanding their empire and modernizing quickly. Japan was one of many Asian countries that quickly began to become focused on foreign trade, industrialization, and expansion. Before the 1870s, Japan was a country that was closed to outside influence, trying to be focused on complete and utter autonomy. The previous Japanese government, the shogunate, were not open to trade with foreign countries, which many people did not agree with. This led to a shift in power called the Meiji Restoration. The Meiji were focused on diplomacy, expanding their military, strengthening the economy while using other countries, and complete modernization of their culture.
Japan was able to progress exponentially in terms of industrialization and modernization because of the excellent timing of the Meiji Restoration and the country's work ethic as a whole.
In foreign affairs, they wanted to create different alliances, search for new ideas around the world. This drastic change in type of government had lasting effects on Japan's hegemony and diplomacy in the future. After their modification of government, Japan wanted more control over more land. The countries that Japan had its eye on were China and Korea. China had been declining drastically relative to other industrial nations during the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Japan had been increasing its defense sector and therefore were able to execute their plan incredibly easily. Korea had also been weakening exponentially. Due to their increasing instability in government and the working class revolting, Korea was not ready to take on any attacks, which made them the perfect target.
During the Meiji period, which lasted from 1868 to 1912, it was a common idea that Japan's monarch was superior to Korea's. Therefore, Japan felt the need to take control of the Korean peninsula to make it a part of its expanding empire. Once European powers like Britain started to focus on Japan and making alliances with them, Japan launched the Sino-Japanese War. The first major conflict that arose with Japan's imperialistic rise to power was this. The war was fought because the Japanese felt that Korea should declare themselves independent from China when it came to foreign relations. The Chinese disagreed, and the fighting began. The war resulted in a Japanese victory and marked the emergence of Japan as a world power.
The defeat gave hope to many imperialized nations in the West to put up resistance against the Western powers.
Now let's go to the primary source corner.
Essentially, through the Treaty of Shimonoseki, Japan made sure that any territories that were taken over were immediately assimilated into the Japanese society quickly by making sure that, quote, cities, towns, and ports, in addition to those already open, shall be open to trade, residence, industries, and manufacturers of Japanese subjects under the same conditions with the same privileges and facilities. This meant that the Japanese government wanted to ensure that Japanese citizens were treated well in the new territories so that their culture could thrive throughout the empire. The next conflict was the Russo-Japanese War, in which Japan took on Russia.
Along with Japan, Russia had its eye on expanding its territory to Eastern Asia. Industrialization led to the creation of railroads. Russia began to make a transcontinental railroad. This was a hopeful way to increase their power in Asia and take over territory. However, once Japan had gained control of parts of China and Korea, it focused on Russia and making sure their land was not taken.
The Japanese upset the Russians in the fight for Korea,
and this win represented the first time that an Asian power had defeated a European power in modern times. The war was resolved by the Treaty of Portsmouth, which gave all the power over Korea to Japan, forcing Russian authorities out of the area.
Territories that Japan won from Russia included strategic points like Port Arthur and the Liaodong Peninsula. Direct rule in Korea. For the first 10 years, Japan ruled directly through the military, and any Korean resistance was crushed. Direct rule in Taiwan. The Governor-General enacted extremely cruel laws for the punishment of all people unwilling to submit to Japanese rule. In the first 9 months of occupation, there was martial law.
Not everything about Japan's rise to power was good. Let's take a look at some Japanese imperialism consequences.
Because of the Sino-Japanese War, Taiwan and China were separated, which later led to the Two-China problem. Because of Japan's success in the war, the defeat fed the internal unrest in Russia, causing the Russian Revolution shortly after the war. After the Japanese gained access to Korea, they modernized Korea to Japanese standards. To many current-day Koreans, the Japanese occupation was viewed in a totally negative light. But to many of the older generation who lived through it, we look back on it with mixed feelings, but not entirely bad.